is I start the stream on YouTube. Hold tight, and I will have a link for y'all's. All right.
So 700 patients have gone through Johns Hopkins.
Hot mic, back to not hot. Okay, I dropped the link into the general chat, and I am now dropping that link into the schedule, as I always do. Is today the 20th? Yeah. Hang on, how did I do that last one? Okay, I did the whole thing. All right. Okay. All right. Okay, that's in the, so link to the YouTube video is in the class schedule. And also in the general chat, I'm just doing one other quicko thing. Right? Yeah. Okay. All right. Cool. All right. So that takes care of that, and live stream is rocking and rolling. And all right, man. Hey, everybody. What's happening?
Just one.
Glad. Is my audio okay? I'm still on my AirPods, barring some influx.
Just fine.
Seems good.
Yeah. So, thank you. Let me see. Yeah, Mitch. We're trying to run the bot, what we're calling the Skater Chick bot, a couple times, and we're still kind of like refining that system. Okay. So, and the other thing too is if you're there, okay, Devin's on. Yeah, and the other thing is if you're ever there and there's stuff that's like screwed up and you know what I mean, it doesn't get recorded right. We do have manual solutions to these things, right? So we can make sure things are fixed. Now, one thing I wanted to just hit real quick. I'm looking on the voice chat, and I got 3, 6, 9, 10, 11, 12. Got 12 of you on right now. That's not counting me, not counting Devin. If my count's correct. But we had the first Goth pattern assignment thing that was due. When did we make it due? Sunday night. What did we say? Let me just look real quick. Yeah, we said January 17th, which would be like Sunday night, if I'm not totally mistaken. And there were 10, so there's 13 students registered for the class right now. And the answer, Braden, is they're going to be like today. We'll get after it. We're gonna keep up. And Devin and I were actually just talking about it before class, and then we'll jump on it like right after class and get those assignments graded. Yeah. So, but anyway, but there were 10 submissions. There were 3 of those registered for the class that did not submit anything. So, I mean, you got to manage you. I'm not gonna beg anybody to succeed. But I am saying that you're spilling it. You're spilling your cup right now. If you're starting right out of the chute, and not doing that. Now, if there's something circumstantial, hit me up. Just DM me on Discord, and we can talk about it. If there's something going on, but you got to come in. You got to hit this thing right out of the chute. Okay. Everybody got that? So I'm talking to the 3 but I'm also really talking to everybody as kind of a reminder, right? You got to be self-managed, and there's a certain amount of, there's a certain amount of stuff that's messed up because it's my fault, and then I'm always flex on that. But once it's like really known and it's nailed down, it's just like sitting there, then you got to be responsible to do it, get it done. If you have circumstances, please let me know. I am probably about the easiest guy at the university in terms of working with you on stuff. You know what I mean? Because I know that life happens. And I also know that if the same person has life happening every single week, then maybe that's just bad planning. Nobody has that bad a run of luck. That's not true. It's rare for somebody to have that bad of a run of luck. Okay. All right. Is that cool? That's just my little like Grandpa Chuck here giving you a little nudgy nudge, okay, to be successful. All righty. Um, and don't get behind, and it's just gonna be bad. Okay. What else? What else? Oh yeah, yeah. We were talking. You know where this was, by the way? This is my copy of The Timeless Way of Building. It was, it was very difficult to track it down because it was sitting on the same shelf as a pattern language, like about 3 inches away. So I think I was just rushed. It's also a fairly, it's a fairly bland, thing. And then when you get that off, you get that nice, you get that nice cloth feel. It's a nice quality book. Love this book. Love, love, love this book. Um, from a technical and design perspective, I actually feel like this book uh, well, I'm going to say it changed my life. And I don't mean that in the same way as like, maybe religious conversion or other kinds of things where you can point to a book or a moment or whatever. Um, but in so many respects, it's almost like for there's some elements of my intellectual life or my cognitive life, and especially my design life that I mark as pre-Alexander and post-Alexander. My world changed with Alexander. So, um, and interestingly, I did get an email today, um, and it was probably yeah. Check it out. I'm gonna just roll it over here for you. Um, check this out. This was in my email today. Can I make that bigger? Yeah. Hello. Looking for something in engineering books? We have some suggestions. The Timeless Way of Building. Okay. The Nature of Order. This 4 book set. I have that set right over there on my shelf. That's the one I mentioned, signed by Alexander. I have notes on the synthesis of form. I have not read it. I do not have the production of houses and these other things. Well, there's Nature of Order again. Anyway, but thank you, Amazon or whoever, for listening in on our conversations, apparently. Or maybe I looked it up. Maybe I looked up something related while we were doing the researchy stuff and talking about stuff. I don't know, but that's like, I don't know. It's kind of good news. If you're in 305G, some of you are. That's one of those like social media listening in on you, you know what I mean? Knowing about stuff. You got the idea. Okay. Do we have is there any other like housekeeping crapola that we need to deal with before we launch in? Um,
How do we do attendance again?
um, if Devon's, if the Skater Chick bot is functioning
It's
properly,
functioning.
it is functioning. Devon
Yeah,
asserts, he asserts,
yeah. So basically, for right now, until it's fully automated this weekend, every 15 minutes I'll be doing a discrete it'll just check who's here.
like a manual check, right?
Yep, and basically I just run it and it just grabs whoever is active in the voice channel. And if you're in the class, it'll mark you in an Excel document for now. So basically, just just be in class.
Don't
You
do
don't have to
anything.
write
Yeah,
anything.
just be here.
Yeah.
Be in the voice channel.
And I don't know if you're doing the same thing with makeups, like if you do miss a class because you can't make it or something, the attendance channel will, I'll change the name of that as well. Will just be for like making up, like watching on YouTube, or like if you missed or something.
Yeah. And as always, if there's anything, that's messed up or, didn't work or whatever, you just let me know. It's pretty easy to, you know what I mean? Where everybody's just involved, sincere, engaged, and something gets messed up, you know, then it's really not a problem, and we'll work with you on that. Get it straightened out. Easy. It turns out we can do the right thing at all times. Just a quick check again, because there's a lot of dynamics to this class, right? And I just want to make sure that we're on the same page, right? Those are lectures, introduction to the course and to stuff. We started talking about patterns and orders of ignorance. We're going to continue that right now. Those were the readings due Sunday, and that was the Goff assignment number 1, chapter 1 from the now unnamed former Skater Chick book. Monday was no class, and today it's kind of patterns and design, but we're going to I'm not, keep in mind, and again, some of you that have had me in other classes, you know this, I'm absolutely not going to be a slave to, we got to cover this material before the class expires. In a class with this size, where we can get a lot of engagement and have this more kind of intimate setting, even though we're remote, we can take whatever time we need when a topic is interesting, and I don't really care. We're gonna have a cool experience by the time everything's done, and when what hit where, I don't care. It's really more experiential than all that. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Now, this one shows up for Sunday. There's a small, it's like a small book. It's like a little libretto written by Cope, Jim Copeland, called Software Patterns. And what I did was, it's not crazy huge, but Tim and Devin and I talked a little bit about it, and we realized there was no great reason why we couldn't split it. You know what I mean? It's like 60 pages in the PDF. And like, well, let's just go half of it this week, half of it the following week, right? So just to make that a little bit easier. And for my money, this little mini, I don't even know what to call it. It's like almost like a white paper, almost like a tiny little book, by Cope, is really, really nicely done. And Cope is one of the early patterns guys who also just really respect him intellectually, and his knowledge, and influential role in many respects, in that early community. So anyway, so that's coming up. Okay, so just grab that. The link is there to that document is on Canvas. Okay, and then we're going to we're going to kind of float here. We're going to get into UML. We're going to get into the idea of design patterns, design and patterns, and design patterns. And eventually we'll roll in, and sometime after my surgery, we're going to be dropping a little bit more concretely into, use case design and using UML as a way of thinking about design. Okay. And then but keep in mind, we've got a week off, and then the next Goff 2 is due in 2 weeks, week and a half from now. No, sorry, a week from now. It's due Tuesday, the 26th. So it's a week from now is Goff 2. Okay? So don't piddle around. This is coming, by the way. You know how this thing is going to go every single time there's a new Goff thing. Okay? You already know there's going to be, I think 1 through 5 is up, and Tim's been working on getting the assignments up. 1 through 5, I think, are up. You already know they're coming. If you can pace yourself, maybe every Saturday or every Sunday or every Friday, it's like your Goff day, and you budget your number of hours it's going to take you to kind of work your way through it. Pull up the thing so you're doing it at the same time. upload your code, and but that's like a personal budget, time management. Okay, that's how you get successful. And that's coming. Okay, Goff 1 through 12 is happening every single week. It's going to be a thing. Okay, so do not piddle around. I beg you. The rest of it is going to be more, readings that I give you and specific assignments that I'm still kind of working up, things that we'll do that are about design. So okay, I like that, Braden. The golf patterns with 18, yeah, front nine and back nine, exactly. I respect that as a golfer. I do respect that. I give you as Exhibit A. This is my little pen holder. Now, if that doesn't say golfer, I don't know what does. Okay, let's do the thing. I made a note. Are there any other things? Any other housekeeping? Are we good? We got this thing right. I always try to do some housekeeping at the start. Just make sure that we're on track with what in the crap we're doing. Are we cool?
I just think you opened a can of worms by calling yourself Grandpa Chuck. I think that rolls off the tongue better than Professor K is all.
Grandpa Chuck, Dr. K. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Anybody that wants to be an adopted grandchild, it's fine. I got a ton already, so it's all good. Just join the party, man. See, I'm just not that hard to get along with. Okay, we're dropping back to the. I was going through some slides, as I recall, and we were having some discussion, and then somebody ran over. Who was it that ran over and grabbed a copy of The Timeless Way of Building out of the library? It was Braden. Yeah, posted a picture. Well done, sir. I will give extra credit for The Timeless Way of Building. I don't know how much. Did I say 1%? But you need it in your life anyway. You know what I mean? You do need it in your life, so it's all good. Okay, amigos. Did that thing launch up? Yeah, we were, as you may recall, right here with one of my favorite vintage pictures of all time. And then we were on, I made a note, we were on slide 23. And which was, we had talked about backing up, okay? We had talked about the definitions of patterns, the object-oriented roots, some of the characteristics of patterns. Then we talked about architectural patterns, which kind of appear, design patterns, which were more solutions in a context, and then idiomatic patterns, where the context was much more narrow, like a specific language, things like that. And then we got to right here, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to zippity through this, and then I'm going to take a little bit of a, well, we got to get to, there's some things that we need to talk about the orders of ignorance. We need to talk about a little bit about philosophy of learning. And we didn't go through slides about me yet, did we? I don't think we did. Problem is 3 classes, it all blends together, and I can't remember where I talked about what. Sound like a no?
I don't think so.
Okay, seems like not. You'd remember. All right, elements of patterns. Now I'm going to have you're going to write some patterns of your own, okay? The patterns, I don't yet know to what extent I want you to do code-based patterns, where it's deep in the software, or more high-level patterns, right? Last semester or last year, I had one assignment where we did just some life hacks. Here, give me a life hack that is a pattern because it's a solution to a problem in a context that clever people have figured out, and then when you see it, your life is like really, really better, than it used to be. But we document patterns. They become documented. So right over here in what is sometimes called APL, a pattern language, right? I showed you this notion of there's a pattern. It has a name. It has what's the problem. It states the context. It tells you about the forces at play, right? Remember Alcove, right? Like people want to be part of the collective. People also want to be, have some privacy. And those are the opposing forces. The solution is an alcove, right? And then Alexander will state all of that. He'll have a name, but the problem, the context, and the forces for Alexander style patterns, the problem, context, and forces is that first little area. And then it's followed by he'll always say, therefore, and then will come the solution. And then comes, some kind of an example. And I want to no, wrong book. Hang on. I want to just give you an example so this is memorable. Yeah. Hang on a second. Some of them are long. But here's an example. Here's a pattern called main entrance. Okay? That's the name of the pattern. It's quite insightful, right? And it starts by saying placing the main entrance or main entrances is perhaps the single most important step you take during the evolution of building plan. That's kind of context and importance, right? It has a title, and then it goes, the position of main entrances controls the layout of the building. It controls movement to and from the building, and all other decisions about layout flow from this decision. When they're placed correctly, the layout of the building unfolds naturally and simply. When the entrances are badly placed, the rest of the building never seems quite right. It's therefore vital that the position of the main entrance be made early and correctly. Okay? And then he starts talking about, the functional problem which guides the placing of main entrances is simple, right? What's he doing? He's stating the problem. And then he says the entrance must be placed in such a way that people who approach the building see the entrance or some hint of where the entrance is as soon as they see the building itself. Have you ever been to a building? Usually in a modern office park. Usually not a big problem with homes, although even that's an issue. You ever been, seen a house where it's like the entire presentation of the home is essentially the garage pushed way out, like right on the street? And the entrance is like implied by the deep dark shadow over on the side. You ever seen, homes like this? But have you ever been, give me a little vote, have you ever been, oh, Tobias, we're going through, the slide is called, what is it called? It's a slide set, it should be up there, called Introduction. That's the name of the slide set. Cool. Thank you, Blake. Let me see.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet, man. Right. No, Braden, this is a good example, right? You go to a public building and it says, please use whatever, right? The entrance should invite you. You should see it. It should be obvious. You shouldn't have to noodle about it. You shouldn't have to, in that moment, exert cognitive energy just to figure out how to get in the building. This is what Alexander is saying. But have you ever been in an office building where you like literally couldn't, you were at the building, you approached it from the reasonable approach, and you literally couldn't find the way in, right? The door. This is really bad, right? Or thank you, other Devon, that the main looking door, right? That's like false signaling. The building tells you that the building tells you silently, right? Functionally. It tells you this is the main door. And when you get to it, you grab it, you're like, rattle, rattle. And it's like, employees only, visitors, please, whatever, please get lost or whatever. And then it says, Anyway, and it says, the functional problem is rather obvious, but it's hard to overestimate the contribution it makes to a good building. And then he says, we've had this experience over and over again that until this question is settled and an appropriate position chosen, a project is at a stalemate. Fascinating. Anyway, and then it continues on for another 2 pages where he talks about position, and then talks about shape and other dynamics, right? And then he concludes always in Alexander patterns, therefore, and now he's going to tell you what the solution is. And then this is his solution. Place the main entrance of the building at a point where it can be seen immediately from the main avenues of approach, and give it a bold, visible shape which stands out in front of the building. You know what's a good example of this? I just realized there are a number of restaurants. Restaurants are another good example. If you've gone to a restaurant and not been able to find your way in, there is an American Fork on State Street, kind of over in that, and there's like a Costco over there. You know what I mean? It's like it's over by like that In-N-Out Burger exit, that exit, and there's a road that kind of curves around, and I believe it's actually State Street. But on that curve is like there's like Olive Garden is there. Further up, there's a Wallabies, there's an IHOP, and it gets you over kind of toward the Costco. We if you know Utah County, okay. There are a number of buildings, and I'm going to believe right now that IHOP does this and that Wallabies does this, which is that okay. Memo to myself. I want to pull up these. We're going to go. Wallabies and IHOP. What they do is they have a presentation. The main entrance presents to the road, but the road is not the avenue of approach by the customers. In other words, it's prioritized. The design has to prioritize and that's also an opposing force if you wanted to look at it another way, right? When you're in a place where there's a sidewalk, but nobody's walking down that sidewalk, okay? It's not a pedestrian traffic area. So you set your building up, you set your restaurant up so it presents to the road, to the traffic. But then you come up along behind it and to the side, right, in order to park and then walk. And as you approach it, you approach the side. And I think, at least in the case of Wallabies, there's like a side entrance that's not the main entrance. And what they've done is prioritize to the street, to the way it looks from the street, as opposed to the access and the way it looks to a person approaching from where they actually approach from. And I'm not saying that that's right or wrong. I'm saying these are opposing forces, but that's an example. Now, so what you see is what Alexander does. Okay, oh man, thank you. Who did that? Who threw that up there? Rick, thank you. That's exactly it, right? You see how there's like a sidewalk, but that's not a pedestrian zone. And that it sets up, right? If you're over in the Costco, you look across and you see the IHOP. I think that's where that location is, right? But the parking, I'm going to, just because we're talking about it, can I move this over? I don't know that I can slide that. Oh, wait, hang on. Okay, here we go. Yeah, that was what Rick just put up. Okay. And what I was saying was that this is not a pedestrian, it's sidewalk, but nobody's like walking around. So it presents to an intersection, but you park back here, and now you're in this conflict. That's all. And they're both kind of important, but is there a way to make a presentation to the street, right? So that you're selling to a future customer and not become, and I've always just felt just a little bit, in my experience going to IHOP and Wallabies, if somebody wants to pull up Wallabies Street View, but there's always been in my mind a little funky a funky feeling of irritation, or not, maybe that's too strong. Just you know what I mean? There's a little agitation, like there's always that moment where you're like, I'm approaching from the side, and that feels a little weird, right? Yeah, and we're gonna talk about Braden. We're gonna talk about the timeless way of building. No. Sorry. The design of everyday things, Don Norman, and we're gonna talk about Norman doors. Okay, with the push pull. Exactly. Norman doors. Do you that I'm like totally duplicating somebody else? Anyway, perfect example of right. But isn't that amazing? What I love about Alexander is 254, I think, patterns like that. And when you actually read it, you're just like, oh yeah, I've dealt with that, you know. And then you start. What I'm trying to get you to think about in this class in 3450 is to get a little bit outside of just your world where you're not thinking about all that, or somebody who's like, well, really, Dr. K, I mean, is it really that big of an inconvenience? Okay, there we go. There's wallabies. By the way, as IHOPs go, that's not a bad IHOP, and I like the wallabies. Okay, I like this wallabies. I'm going to open up the original again and drop it over here again. Thank you. Right, that's in many respects almost even. I don't know. I think the IHOP is worse because with the IHOP, the store is right out here on the edge, and the wallabies, by being set back, feels more accessible from the parking lot, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? I've but there's also a side door on the wallabies, and I like wallabies. Okay, let me be really clear about that. And IHOP is IHOP, so you know what you're getting with IHOP, right? And it could be worse. Could be a lot worse. Yeah, thank you. Um, yeah, absolutely. But it's that what's your audience? And by the way, this notion of what's your audience um, is actually a design principle by itself that comes down over and over and over again, and we'll talk about it with use cases. Yeah. Now, some people will Alexander often has an example, but others will say in code, for example, really helpful to have an example. Like, for example, the duck thing when you're doing the strategy pattern in Goff chapter 1. Some people like to have a resulting context. Like that puts us now in this state when we're done. It resolves to this condition. And some people will talk about what the rationale is, but Alexander tends to put that up front, and then potentially related patterns and also known uses and things like that. In other words, there's no like truly canonical structure of how a pattern has to be written. Okay, we usually refer to the Alexandrian form, follows what I just showed you in a pattern language. Cope proposes, I think this actually comes out of Cope, and he proposes a certain kind of standard. Okay. And then if you look at the actual Goff book, my copy of which is still not on my desk because I'm a dummy. Why didn't I grab that? I don't know, because I didn't think about it. But the Goff book has a certain pattern, if you will, for embodying meta pattern. Really, it's a pattern about the patterns. And it's okay. You can do it different ways, but just keep in mind that these are the things that wind up showing up in there. Okay. Now, then comes this notion. I'm going to gloss over this because notice the book title, A Pattern Language. What's a pattern language? Understand what a pattern is. And I'm going to gloss over this kind of quickly because I think the notion of pattern language has, in my view, never really been sort of fully realized, if that makes sense. So, Brad Appleton, one of the early guys that wrote about stuff in the pattern space, if a pattern is a recurring solution to a problem in a context given by some forces, then a pattern language is a collective of such solutions. Okay. which at every level of scale work together to resolve a complex problem into an orderly solution according to a predefined goal. Right? In other words, and I actually, when I was doing my dissertation, and I had a bunch of patterns, and they clearly were, by Brad's definition and by Alexander's definition, a pattern language. I myself was a little uncomfortable with the sort of the theoretical foundation of calling them a language for a number of reasons, and I called them a pattern set. And I just said, I'm going to bail and do something a little more generic. It is clearly a set of patterns. Is it a pattern language? I don't know. Here was Cope. A pattern language defines a collection of patterns and the rules to combine them into an architectural style. Pattern languages describe software frameworks or families of related systems. Okay, fine. But again, it's just like something I just haven't seen. You know what I mean? It always felt like, I don't know, like stretching to try to, oh, that's my pattern language. It always, to me, was on the edge of comprehension. And so again, but I want you to be fluent in why it is that it's called a pattern language and not just called patterns. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, there is this interesting question, like, that's all great. How do you actually make that into a useful methodology? It's one of the areas that I believe, in my view, that the software patterns community, in my perspective, has on balance failed very, very badly. And I believe I have my own theories. And one of them is that in order to talk about design patterns, and in order to talk about how do you use those patterns in a methodology, you have to talk at a meta level about the patterns. You have to talk about the patterns as tools within a higher, right, view, a meta level pattern, if you will, of methodology. And back in the early days of the software patterns community and the plop conferences, there was a very, very strong social pressure against going meta, as they would call it. Literally, going meta was the phrase, and it was a pejorative, and thou shalt not go meta. And I always thought that was absurd. I have strong opinions about this. I always felt like it was absurd. And my first exposure is I'm in my mid 30s when I bump into this, 35, 36, 34, and that's like 25 years ago. And my attitude hasn't changed in 25 years. In fact, I believe history kind of, backs up what I'm trying to say. Because the reality is, going meta must happen, right? You cannot say, we're going to do algebra, don't go meta. Okay, so I can't talk about the higher level ways in which algebra fits into the world because that's meta. No, just solve quadratic equations. And it was kind of like the attitude, and it was very explicit. We need everybody in the community to just mine patterns. We need more patterns, encyclopedic mining of patterns. And I have no problem with that. The problem I had was it was a very young field. Very little had actually been done yet. And the powers that be, right, the influential players, were denigrating anybody who dared to go meta. And my argument, I made this on, the public mailing list, right? Got me into a couple flame wars with some notables. And my thing was, going meta is happening. You cannot not go meta. It has to happen. So you're not actually saying don't go meta. What you're really saying is you don't go meta while we will go meta because we are the ones who created this field. we are the sacred keepers of the gate, and we are going to create essentially a stagnant pond in which you guys are going to float around like ducks, do your thing, and we'll govern and manage all of the thoughts. And I thought it was bull crap, and I thought it was not the spirit of academia, and not the spirit of open exploration. So anybody that showed up with a different idea, like, folks showed up with the idea of anti-patterns. And it was like, wham, 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 that's not a pattern. Even some of the people that came up, Bushman and gang, that came up with like architectural patterns. Wham, 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 that's not a pattern. It was very parochial. It was very closed system. And my whole argument was saying that going meta is bad is hypocritical bullcrap because somebody has to do it, and it's just you. So the notion, and one of the byproducts of that is there never really was, in my experience, any methodological exploration, because there wasn't a healthy community around methodological explorations. It was only like Goff and maybe 10 others that were in the inner sanctum who had earned the social right to even talk about it, and the rest were essentially shouted down in the public square. That included me, so I got a little pissy. And in part because you remember this book by this man, Christopher Alexander, had changed my frickin' life. And what was going on here was not going on in the software patterns. The things that were, to me, the most beautiful about what Alexander was doing did not find their way into Goff. And it didn't make, you understand, it didn't make Goff less useful, because Goff, I think, is really a fantastic contribution. No question. The problem is then the whole community just kind of shriveled up, and there was no vigor, there was no invigoration in the community because ideas weren't welcome. And I just think in general, when ideas aren't welcome, I mean, unless they're really absurd ideas, you know what I mean? It's sort of like a technical application of the Overton window in a sense. It's not unlike some of the other things. So anyway, that's an interesting question, and one that, so Braden picked up the book. If anybody else picks it up, I would love, as you read it, to maybe just jump on, a Discord chat sometime, just to break it down, because I think I read it in the mid '90s. I reread it, I think, in the mid aughts. And I really need to reread it. It's really just that important, I think, a piece of work in the academic, intellectual space. So Braden just said, it really is short segments. You can read for 5 minutes and get something. It's really true. It's meant, you can read it in chunks and have it really hang together and be cool. So, yeah, man, amen to that. Okay. Keep going. Alexander.
Sorry,
Yeah, go.
if you don't mind my asking,
Yes,
what was some of the rationale behind avoiding talking about the meta patterns?
On their part?
Yeah,
Well, that's part of my problem. It was almost more sort of like religious dogma. It was more dogmatic. It was more like, we don't need you to talk about this. What we need is for you to mine patterns. It was really kind of a inner sanctum versus the plebes, you know what I mean? Or the proles, to grab a 1984 reference. It was very much elitist, I thought. For example, this is a true story. I was at one of the early PLOP conference, PLOP 4. PLOP stands for Pattern Languages of Programming, and there was a conference. I don't even know if they're still going. I think they are. But I was at PLOP number 4. It was very early. It was 96. Presented a paper. Met Neil Harrison, actually, our chair. at that conference. And anyway, and I was at lunch, and I was sitting right next to Johnson. What's his first? I wanted to go Howard Johnson because that was an ancient restaurant, and I wanted to go Howard Jones because we've been working up a tune with my band. What's Johnson's first name? What's his frickin' first name? Come on, man. Why am I blanking? I could look it up. I thought it might be in this Gator Chick book there, and I don't have my copy. What's his name? It's probably Howard. No, well, come on, talk to me. Who's got it? You kill me. I'm literally gonna beat you to this. Hold tight. And then I'm gonna kick myself because it's not like I don't know. Ralph Johnson. Okay, there we go. Yes, slowpokes. Ralph Johnson. Anyway, so this is a true story. And Ralph, if you're listening, you probably don't remember this. It was 96. I'm in Urbana-Champaign, on this facility near University of Illinois. And I'm at lunch, I'm sitting next to Ralph Johnson. And I said to him, and I was in the middle of my dissertation, and I had really latched onto patterns. I loved it. I was happy to be there. I'd read Alexander by this point. And sitting next to Ralph, one of the four, mind you, one of the gang of the four. So this is not secondhand information or the rumor mill. This was my actual exchange with Ralph. And I said, how do you think about design methodology, right? How do you apply methodology to this idea of patterns, right? We have these patterns, we have design patterns, right? What do you do methodologically? In other words, how do you incorporate those effectively into the creation of software, right? And I think, so that's a meta question. So I was broaching the sacred limits, you know what I mean? I was saying things that can only be said in the Holy of Holies. Which would be those guys together over coffee. And I was just a guy, and I was 36. But that was really essentially, right? That was my question. Right? How do you use these things? That was the question I was really noodling over relative to my dissertation. That's what I wanted to try to understand. Okay. Now, as God is my witness, the following is nearly verbatim. He looked at me. I felt like it was very dismissive. He was kind of like, now maybe that's just his affect. Maybe it wasn't personal. You know what I mean? Maybe that's the way I've seen him in other settings, and maybe that's just always the way he looks, kind of dopey and dead-faced, whatever. But he looks at me. I felt a little disgusted, like he looked a little disgusted. And he said to me the following: "That's not important." Literally, he said, "That's not important." Direct quote. And he goes, "What is important is that you mine patterns." I swear to you, and that was pretty much the whole conversation that I had lunch with this guy. Like, whoa. And I was staggered. I was really, really staggered by that response, right? So Sam, there was no rationale. There was nothing other than, if anyone's going to talk about the meta level stuff, it'll be us, and we'll let you know. In the meantime, if you would all be just good little proles, do your job, then we'll sell more books or something. I don't know. Our career, you know what I mean? Is that making sense? I swear to
Yeah.
you, man,
Yeah. I
that was
don't
the
know.
actual conversation.
Yeah. No. I was just asking because it seems extremely surreal, sort of.
Well, I felt, yeah, and it felt that way to me. It felt that way to me. at the time because I didn't understand the idea that one couldn't have a higher level conversation, right? Because I was in a PhD program. I'm being taught, learning, and exercising, you know, like how to think and how to challenge the assumptions and how to, right? I mean, if you're going to be a PhD, you ought to, you know what I mean? When you're a doctoral level, you can do this anyway, but I'm just saying that it's like this. This is a little bit of a teaser for the Orders of Ignorance. As an undergrad, you're taught like, here are the well-known questions and here are the well-known answers, right? And then later on, we're going to give you only the questions and you're going to demonstrate the answers. We will call that learning, right? You're going to just regurgitate, but you're not really invited to question the questions. You're really not invited to question much of it. You're just supposed to generate the proper answers when given the questions. That's kind of undergrad. And this is my own like metaphor for this idea. When you get to like a master's level, it's almost like we're like, hey, what if the well-known answers weren't ideal or perfect, or maybe they were even wrong? What if, what we thought we understood about that question was in fact not accurate, right? So you can question the well-known answers, right? And that's good. That's great because it makes you think about, well, what if that wasn't true? That is science, by the way, right? And it's also why, from a purely intellectual inquiry perspective, I am whatever the opposite of persuaded is. I am an induced skeptic anytime I ever hear anybody use the phrase "the science is settled." It's bullshit because that's not science. That's not how science works. The science is never settled because one is always free to go, well, what if the answers aren't right? Whatever that is. Read Thomas Kuhn, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. Somebody with Kuhn, if anybody wants to pull that up real quick, drop that in the chat. It's a really great book about the philosophy of science. It's really an important book. But anyway, what I'm getting at is that the science is never settled because one can always question the well-known answers. Now, what Kuhn teaches and kind of reinforces is that when you've got a theory that's really functional, right, its power of explanation remains very robust. And when you poke at the well-known answers, they don't yield much. That's why we stick with it. But somewhere along the line, a guy like Einstein shows up and goes, "Hey, what if there's a dual nature of, of matter?" Right? So, and then everything changes, of course, right? But somebody has to show up and ask that question. Okay, more at a PhD level, and again, it's not like you have to have this degree to do these things, but I'm just saying, there's like a higher level really where you get to question the questions. You're like, was that even the right question to ask? Maybe there are other questions that we should have been asking instead. And then you're like, whoa, what if? And then you ask the new questions, and then whole new frameworks spring up, So, awesome, man. Thank you, Sam, for dropping that link. I really do recommend Kuhn. But so the idea is that in other words, the key to academic inquiry, and in fact to intellectual inquiry of any type, is a freedom to question. Right there, if you are shouted down or condemned or judged for having questioned the answers, or even for having questioned the questions, then that is religion, and bad religion at that. Because I think there's good religion that doesn't do that, but I think that that's bad religion. But it is in fact religion and dogma. You know what I mean? Okay, whoa, hang on a second. What is that? That's not about Christopher Alexander, is it? Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Okay, sorry. Let me drop it. Okay. Oh, whoo. Way to go, Braden, man. I don't even know what this says yet, but I'm dropping it over here because this is Wikipedia, the Alexander. I'm going to blow that up. Wow. Okay. The Alexander conspiracy. Can you? Is that big enough to read through the Discord chat? Am I okay? So this
It's
just
a little blurry, but it's all right.
I can go bigger. Hang tight. It's more just a question of like how readily I'm game to scroll kind of thing. But I think that works. So this just goes design patterns and Kent Beck and Ward Cunningham, right, who came up with extreme programming and wikis, um, which they were part of the Hillside group, and okay, extreme programming. It seems like too much of a coincidence that some of the work by these OO gurus was based on Alexander's work, while other parts were not when they are so closely related to Alexander. And I agree with that, which is really isn't that essentially what I was saying? This is backed up by Johnson, that's my buddy, who has previously described in an email exchange how Kent Beck and others took ideas from Alexander, but later hid the fact that this is where the ideas came from. Okay, very interesting. And this is in '02. Okay, extreme programming and patterns. Okay, interesting. Okay.
In what I was looking, it seems that Ralph, I forgot his last name also.
Johnson. Yeah.
Seems like Ralph Johnson refers to meta programming or meta patterns as pattern sequences. I don't know
Okay.
if that was interchangeable, but it kept feeling the same.
Yeah. No, I think it's related. Anyway, yeah. Now we are very much, off. Which is
Sorry.
no, man. You should know by now that I'm okay with that. I mostly when I draw attention to it, I'm mostly trying to be sensitive to y'all's because you know what I mean. Uh, because I'm good with it. But interestingly, let me see. I want to just draw one more thing real quick here. This is a paper. Let me see. Okay, here we go. This is, and I'll blow that up for you as well. I just did a quick search for quote design patterns close quote and quote going meta close quote. Okay, that's what I was trying to do. I got this paper towards a mathematical foundation for design patterns. Okay, that's going, and I do know Amnon Eden. I don't know the other guys, or at least have had some experience somewhere somehow, and I don't remember exactly where. Okay, so and it starts in, and I don't even know what the context is. If this is a paper, it's like a university, like a technical report from 1999. Okay, this is what I was just trying to pull up real quick. Because they're trying, what they're trying to do is find a meta level way of looking at. Come on, man, where's my going meta? Here we go. Relationship between patterns, and it talks about some discussion about that. Blah blah blah. Refinement. Now this is a quote of Ralph Johnson taken from Blicity's in another report about something else. Right. When we wrote our book, we were trying to hide something. I have not seen this quote before, by the way, even though this was 97, which was the year after I actually had that conversation with Johnson. We were trying to hide something. We were trying to avoid talking about one pattern being a specialization of another, or one pattern containing another as a component. We wanted to avoid going meta and just wanted to talk about patterns, which was interesting. Okay. For starters, Alexander absolutely talks about the hierarchy of patterns and patterns as compositions of other patterns and special, the kind of composition specialization, that kind of stuff. Alexander absolutely talks about it. Anyway, the world is different now. This is 97. People want to know the relationship between patterns, and we need to tell them. The relationship here is so obvious that we need to emphasize it, not just tuck it away at the end of the related patterns section. Okay, right. Except, okay, I'm glad he was saying that. My biggest flame war about going meta was after that. So if he had the thought, it didn't stick, if that makes sense. It's fascinating. In fact, okay, I'm not going to post this up because it's it was a patterns discussion thread that I was involved in. And then I'll get off this. We got other stuff to get to, but where is it? Where does it start? Yeah, it started, I think, even with it turned into a private email exchange between me and someone else. Okay, so here's one. There was a thread by a guy that I really like called Ron Goldman of Stanford. He wrote a post on the thread that was called Going Meta Can Save the Day. The date on this is 2000. So there was still a big pushback, not about going meta, strictly speaking, but about who got to go meta. Okay, let me just read this to you real quick. Cope had written on that discussion thread. This is the quote that Cope had written. There's a place for going meta, but most of the energy should go into the building of the body of literature that captures who we are and what we do. Having that, we'll have something to reflect on. That was really, in a sense, the argument against going meta. And then here's what Ron Goldman wrote. He said, I totally agree with the need to do real work and not have one's head always up in the clouds. However, refusing to go meta means that we are giving up any attempt to improve what we are doing through reflection or creating theoretical frameworks. And then he talks about some experiences he had with Dick Gabriel in grad school, about the Umbogo sort that they came up with, which was the provably worst possible sorting algorithm that would, in fact, yield a sorted list. And I'll let you noodle on what that might be. But essentially, it was to randomly order the list and then check to see if it was sorted. And then if it wasn't, then you randomly order it again and check to see if it's sorted. Okay. Which is just fantastic. Let me see something real quick. All right. And then he says, the reason I mention that here is that I feel we're using a similar algorithm to develop patterns. Go off and write a pattern, maybe workshop it so people can point out, which sections are well ordered and which aren't. To extend the analogy, yes, you need to spend a lot of time writing, but you need more than a few basics, right? In other words, he goes into to basically say, um, that he said, I believe Alexander and his colleagues spent years critiquing modern architecture, considering older styles of building, discussing problems that arose in their ongoing projects, all of the stuff that eventually went into the timeless way of building. And he says, and then well, here we go, beautiful man. He says, let me second Charles Knutsen's recent posting where he said, I didn't even realize when I pulled this up that Goldman was going to quote me. But he said, let me second Charles Knutsen's recent posting, where he said, quote, that the underlying foundations of patterns as applied to software should be more open to discussion in an appropriate forum, close quote. That was me, mid-30s me. And then Goldman continues, one place for us to start is, with the Southern, he makes some things, but he's calling out that weird going meta thing, and then it eventually turns into a flame war between me and Cope. And anyway, and then there's some other, anyway, if anybody else is further interested, I have the entire thread saved, including private messages from others in the community saying to me, that, yeah, it's dumb. Everybody's too dogmatic. Thanks for your post, that kind of thing. So anyway, if anybody is interested, we can go deeper on all that. So anyway, but I'm reading all that from an old email from 21 years ago from the patterns discussion mailing list. That's where it's coming from, Blake. And by the way, the Mbogo sort, spelled M''BOGO, I have used that. That is a pattern, man. That is a pattern, baby. The Mbogo sort, as a way to discuss any environment in which people are making decisions by just trying something and seeing if it works with no guiding principles of design. It all segues back, right? That, in my mind, is always the Mbogo sort, and I have regularly, made reference to it, taught about it in like companies I've run, teams I've been part of, research labs. There has to be some understanding of guiding principles that are meta level principles for how you use, like we can say what's a Norman door, which we're going to get to if you don't already know what that is. But okay, how do I use that principle in terms of my design? And therefore I tend to be pretty philosophical and really comfortable going meta. I think I live meta. But everything's meta to something else, right? It's all abstraction. Everything you can deal with is meta to another thing, right? Design patterns are meta to idiomatic patterns. Architectural patterns are meta to design patterns. There's always that set of guiding principles. And that's really what I'm trying to give you really in this class about design patterns is let's understand the patterns so you acquire, let's understand the Goff patterns so you acquire that sort of baseline literacy. But they're going to go away sooner or later. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean life moves on, stuff changes. But it's the philosophical underpinnings of patterns as an idea, which is why, for me, it's right here. Alexander is where that really starts for me. Okay. Sam, you started this. It is your fault that we had that diversion because you asked a really great question and a great question to have, in my view, to have thought about. And it just happens to spark some very old things. But in my view, the community just kind of died. It was very vibrant back then. And people like me showed up like, well, I'm not going to be you know what I mean? I'm not going to be your pattern mining boy, Sorry. I'd like to come eat at the big boy table if I could, with the adults and talk about what I want to talk about. Nope. You're at the little kid table. We're over here having coffee. deciding what the world's going to be. Am I a little bitter? Yeah, actually, yeah. It was so stupid. I'm bitter because this was ready to go baboomba in the software community, and it was essentially shut down by dogmatic people who were, I don't know, they just couldn't see it. I don't know what their motivations are. Okay. Alexander said this in The Timeless Way of Building. A pattern language gives each person who uses it the power to create an infinite variety of new and unique buildings, just as his ordinary language gives him the power to create an infinite variety of sentences. Okay, little philosophical. More patterns, Alexander. These pattern languages are not confined to villages and farm society. All acts of building are governed by a pattern language of some sort, right? Isn't that sort of the overarching connectivity of the patterns? And the patterns in the world are there entirely because they are created by the languages which people use. Again, language stuff, whatever. So, Timeless Way of Building introduces us to this idea of the quality without a name. Now that's very Zen, because didn't you just name it? Meta. So changes can have sweeping influences that could theoretically be catastrophic. I don't know. Doesn't work for me, right? In the context of what the community was trying to be. Um, yeah. So the quality without a name was something Alexander talked about. Um, Again, some people refer to it as the Quan. But the quality without a name, essentially, Alexander talks about this principle of liveness. And that to me is the best way I can think about it. It's like the Alexander patterns, right? If you can't find the front door, you start your engagement with that building in an agitated state, right? If you've got a device that just constantly bugs you, right? Then you're always in a slightly agitated state when you use what it is you do. You see how this relates to design? I think it has everything to do with design. In the case of buildings, if I'm in a room that has light on both sides of the room, which is one of Alexander's patterns, light on two sides of a room is a pattern. So if you've ever been in a building in a room that's corner and you got like a window over here and a window over there, there's something that happens to the light in that room, and it interfaces with humanity. That's the key. It interfaces with humanity. It resonates with our kind of human spirit. You know what I mean? And when it's done right, we feel alive. We feel productive. We feel encouraged and motivated. And nature is a great deal like that. Not universally like that, but nature's a great deal like that, right? You get up in the mountains, whatever, you're sitting on the side of a beautiful lake and its temperature is just right and whatever, right? If you've had that experience, right, and your soul just kind of goes, right? It's like you rest in that moment and you soak it up. That's the quality without a name. Well, when you deal with that's nature, and there are aspects of nature, to be very honest, right? Standing in the middle of a lava field doesn't commit itself, or in the middle of a forest fire. That's also nature. But I'm just saying that these things naturally occur. What does that look like when you're building, a building, constructing a building, or building software, or building a product, right? Anyway, what does that look like? How do you get that, right? And when it's done poorly, think about, and I'd love to have any comments. We're running out of time. Think about buildings or courtyards or outdoor spaces that when you've been there, they just feel like they reject you like an organ donor, organ rejection. Like you go in there and your body just wants to be out of there, right? If you want to drop, if you wouldn't mind either verbally or dropping in the checks, any of experiences with that, right? As opposed to environments where when you go there, it's just like, oh, it's like your blood pressure drops and you're just like, you want to go there. You feel like going there, you know? What is going on? Well, what's going on is the quality without a name. When that quality is there, it resonates with your humanity. When the quality is absent, it agitates that sense of humanity because it's like, I just don't want to be here. Ugh, whatever. Okay. So Blake said, for some reason, the DMV registration area gives me the feeling um, the bad one is what you're saying, Blake, right? And one other thing I want to say, because we really are about out of time, but one of my kind of journeys has been to think about deeply, what does that quality without a name look like when it is in a software product? What does it look like when it is embodied in code? When you read code, right? Or poetry or literature, when you read anything, it can have the quality or it cannot have that quality, So I'm just curious about, other experiences with spaces, times, structures that make you feel a certain way by their nature. That is what Alexander was going after. Okay. And so, um, any other just reactions on that? Blake said, for some reason, my back porch also has that feeling with group. Oh, alone it's fine, but about more than 3 people, and it's not a good place. Right. No, this is exactly it. So be sensitive to that. Okay, that's kind of like your. I'll come up with other assignments besides the golf patterns, but this is one that I just want you to noodle on. Maybe I'll make it into an assignment to talk about, the good quan, the bad, the lack of the quan. And I want to just say one last thing, and it's a pointer, because I want to come back to it when we meet again. What is today? Tuesday? When we meet again on Thursday. Today is Wednesday, when we meet again next Monday. And that is, I'll talk about squeaking doors and shiny objects. They are essentially attachments to this idea of the quan. All right. And I want to just share one real quick experience, and then we'll wrap up. The first time I taught this course here at UVU, and I was just talking about these things, and I was criticizing something. By the way, notice the meme, the top meme, right? The holopeeve, right? This is an example of bad design. Individually fine, you put them together, right? I got hope, I got love, I put them together, holopeeve. And that's an example of somebody not thinking about design. I was criticizing some design, and a student I really, really liked, like one of my favorite students, okay? And she was like, well, it was a little snotty, and she was like, well, what would you do differently? And I think sometimes in like, there's like, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. And especially in like super nice Utah, where everyone's nice, and nice is really important. And I get that. And I'd rather be in nice than in crapola. But my reaction was, I don't know. I don't know what I would do different. I haven't gotten to that part yet. Because step number 1 is to know that it is wrong, or to know that it is right. Why it's wrong or why it's right is a next level. And then what you would do about that is another level after that. So all I know is it's like a squeaking door. If that's doing that, in my life, there's all kinds of products, objects, buildings, rooms, dynamics that make me feel like it's a squeaking door, and others that make me feel like it's a shiny object. Like I go, ooh, that is so cool. Like the picture down below with the cat. It's like Hootie and the Blowfish album cover for, for domesticated animals. I don't know what that is, right? That picture is a shiny object to me. Why? Why? Then you break it down. When something is a squeaking door, you break it down. Now I know why it's squeaky. Now I'm ready to go, well, what would I do differently? Because you got to get to that. But that's not your starting point. And the idea that if you can't say anything good, don't say anything at all does not apply here. You got to start by knowing that something sucks. You have to know it sucks before you can ever fix it. And people who cannot discern the suck in things can never be good designers. Never. Because you have to start by being capable of perceiving that something sucks. Then you got to move that. That's the first step on the path of enlightenment when it comes to design. We will talk more about that. That's going to be a recurring theme. Okay. And also, let me just say, when I say shiny objects, I don't mean objects that shine. It's a metaphor. And when I say squeaking doors, I don't mean doors that squeak. It's a metaphor for the fact that your brain latches on and goes, ooh, okay, that's really, really cool. Okay, we're out of time, past time. We got 6 slides, baby, 7 slides. I don't care, you know that, right? When we come back, we're going to talk about this slide number 30 about some ideas about my own, which we'll come back to. Okay, we're on slide 30 of this same introduction set. Anyway, I hope this is all interesting so far. It's going to get a little more concrete, you know. But again, and if you're new, by the way, if you're new to the class, would you please, and you know what I mean, and didn't get those assignments done first thing, pound it, please get it done. Let me know that, like, look, I added late. There were a couple of those, I think, maybe one. I'm not sure. Let me know. All right, we're out. I'm done. Overtime. I'm sorry. Sorry, not sorry. A little sorry. It's just too good, man. It's just the stuff is too good. But I'm done now. I'm going to stop class mode and start shutting down all my other stuff. So, Hasta, we will see you all later.
Thank you.
Thanks.
If this question is too long to answer, feel free to shut me down. But so I noticed you've been talking a lot about what almost seems to be the aesthetic idea behind design, right? Because I mean, for buildings, I mean, in a lot of respects, the form is the function.
That's
but
right.
that's
Yeah.
not 100% the case for software. I mean, it definitely matter. Wait, okay, sorry. I'm
No, I'm
words
loving
are
it.
hard.
I'm loving it so far.
No,
Keep
no, no.
going.
But my understanding of it is what you want to have when it comes to software basically is legibility and understandability, and the aesthetic. Like it is definitely there, but it's not really the same as when we experience architecture. Right. Our purpose when we're developing software is hopefully that will never have maintenance is a huge part of it, but right, we're not making it to be pretty to look at. We're making it so that we basically have to look at it as little as possible.
So, and let me back up,
And
Sam. You're talking about
yeah.
code. You're talking like the code,
Yeah.
right? The code
Yeah.
as something. Developers have to ingest code.
Yes.
More so even than compilers, right?
Right.
Compilers will
Right.
spend a fraction of a second or a minute, big stuff, right? But as developers, we spend a lot of time reading code that we didn't write,
Right.
you know, et cetera. Yeah. So there's really, because you can talk about this from the level of product, which deals with what the user sees, which is, I think, important. But
Yes.
also, we want to talk about it from the perspective of what a developer sees when they're looking at code,
Right.
and the code itself as a product intended for human consumption.
Right.
And when it's done well, right? You remember that earlier thing I talked about, literate programming by Donald Knuth, things that led into really the precursors of patterns,
Right.
were designed, things that related to program comprehension, right? Ways of conveying information. Okay. So number one, just kind of clarifying that aspect of what it is you're talking about.
Yeah.
I'm going to drop a few ideas and right now we're kind of off the clock. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Class is over. But I'm letting the YouTube
Yeah.
run because I think it's an interesting discussion. And anybody who wants to, tag along and listen is all great. But you mentioned form and function. That's a classic thing, right? And historically, there was always this idea that form follows function. Uh,
Hmm.
Steve Jobs, as a designer, and Walt Disney, um, essentially flipped that a little bit on its ear and essentially said, no, function follows form. And I think there's kind of like maybe a modern view of design in some respects. And Don Norman rips on the idea of, you know, form over function, like screw the
Hmm.
function, form, it's like it's beautiful. And you're like, yeah, but it won't actually make coffee,
Right.
properly. But it's beautiful, most beautiful coffee maker in the world. But
Yeah.
and that all the design awards he was complaining are given to the most aesthetically beautiful things, right? And what he was talking about really was that the paradox, it's actually related to this idea in software engineering, that it is cheaper, which I mean less expensive, less money, less time, and higher quality to build a product correctly with correct process than it is to fling it like a code slinger and drop it over the wall and do it really fast without certain process. Um, it is, in other words, it is cheaper to build high quality software. It is more
Hmm.
expensive to build bad quality software. That's the paradox, right? Because we think,
Right.
well, I'm gonna keep it cheap, so I know the quality will be, but the quality will be. What am I trying to say? We would make it really good, but that would be too expensive. You think that it moves with like quality and expense rise and fall together, but they don't. It's paradoxical. They do this. They're like reverse sliders. So there's a paradox. I think that form and function have a similar sort of interrelationship. And I believe when they're done right, that form and function interplay. In other words, when form is done right, it is harmonious with function. And when function is done right, it is harmonious with form.
Hmm.
Because why do we do form? We do form because it lights up the brain chemicals, makes us go, ooh, ooh, that I love that. It's pretty or whatever, right?
Right.
Um, but the truth is that, and this relates to the next slide we'll do next time. The truth is that when there is a function that gives us that same experience, you
Hmm.
know, we also light up. Like for example, I have these little saline packets, right, that I use for the saline rinse. And I've tried different brands of, it's just salt, for crying out loud, right? It's a
Right.
soluble, it's like a nicely soluble kind of salt. That's all.
Hmm.
It's not big rock salt. And what is it? Why do I use the brand that I use? Because in all the other examples, it's like I tear the packet or I do the thing, and then I have to work at getting the thing just to be opened so I can pour it in, water and do the saline rinse stuff. And the brand I use, the packets have a certain size, a certain shape. I've studied it. And when I tear it off, it goes flat, right? Because you press it on both sides. Now you've got a flat, let's say this is the little packet, right? I got this flat thing. If I take that to the sides and just go boink and just touch the side, it just goes whoosh. And then I can pour it in the water most of the time, right? Okay, it's not aesthetic beauty in the sense that I look at it and I feel like there's an aesthetic attribute to that. But all that's really saying is that the visual, that visual and tactile and taste, right? These are things that we think of more as like our senses, but
Right.
there's
The quality of the experience.
exactly.
Okay.
And that is kind of that dopamine release, which relates to the slide I'm going to get to, which is, the title of a book I'm working on entitled The Minimum Viable Product is Dopamine. The minimum viable product is not salt. That's part of it, but the minimum viable product, viability, salt is a minimum product. The viability comes when I can release some brain chemicals. and so that everything becomes, kind of cool and smooth. And so in that respect, that form is built around a function that delivers an experience that lights up my brain chemicals in a tiny, tiny way. And I only know that because I've tried the other couple of brands and none of them deliver that to me. They all are pain, in some dumb way. So all that's really trying to say, and I think that Jobs really brought this kind of together, is that when you do it right, there is an experience, but it's so hard to describe. Like, for example, when you go to Disneyland and the Disneyland Classic in Anaheim, and you go, have you been to Disneyland, Sam?
Yeah.
Right? So that
Yeah.
experience when you first step foot, you go through the gate and you step foot in onto Main Street, right?
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever thought about how strange that looks when you're just standing there? It feels like you're in a comic strip, or you're in a cartoon, or you really feel transported into a strange world. And it actually has to do with the architecture, the structure, the height, the height of main floors and top floors, angles. It's all built to create a funky illusion that's true no matter how you move up and down, but it's ultimately comes down to this building needs to be this wide, this high, the top floor has to be this big, the angle of the roof has to be whatever. And what I'm trying to say is you cannot separate the form of those buildings and the visual moment with the function cognitively that is generated and the brain chemicals that are released. But it is really systematic, and it was Walt Disney's creation. He was an animator. He was a cartoonist and an animator. He understood visual things. So you know what I mean. So it's a little bit like another again. If these are interesting things, reading biographies of Steve Jobs, like the Walter Isaacson biography, which I highly recommend, and biographies of Disney, which I've read, and books on the design of Disney World, which I've read. You see how much of the form and the function are just like, right? Like one of Walt Disney's things was that one should not be able to see Anaheim from inside the park. You ever think about that when you're in Disney? Go to any other amusement park in the world, and I'm ignoring getting up on high rides. You know what I mean? Ignoring, you know what I mean? That's you can only do so much. Go to any other amusement park, and just walking down the amusement park, you see, the neighborhoods. You see stuff. Disneyland was the first amusement park where once you were in it, you really were transported and you didn't have any clue you were in the middle of Anaheim. Is that form or is that function? You know what I mean?
Right.
I just think it's
Yeah.
both. I think it's both. And it's just like this synergistic meshing of form and so back to code. So what I mean by that is then code, the job of code is to be an artifact for the mental model in the mind of the engineer that built it. So that when another engineer can acquire that artifact and ingest it, they generate approximately the same mental model as the one that built it. And
Okay. So
that's the objective. The objective is a mental experience on the part of the reader. So is it just like good fonts? Sure. Is it just make sure it's formatted? Sure. But it's more than that.
right. No. Okay. Okay. In that circumstance, I really see how the architecture analogy holds, right? Because it's yeah. So it's like drawing blueprints for it. And if you have extra towers or rooms that are all skewed to the side, and somebody looks at those blueprints, they're going to be, what on earth was happening, right?
Yeah, that's right. And here's
Or,
a
or, or or even writing as an analogy, right? If you use weird words or you use way too many adjectives, or you lose the plot.
Right. Well, and what you do is you raise the barrier to entry for your audience. You
Okay.
right. You burden and encumber the barrier to entry. When you're doing it
Okay.
well, right? The barrier to entry. Like I'm reading a novel right now, recommended a sci-fi novel, recommended by a friend, and I'm committed to powering through because he really wants to talk about the book, and I love my friend, and I'm going to do it.
Hmm.
But dang, man, over and over and over again, the writing is so clunky that it keeps like jarring me out of that. When we read and when we watch movies, we participate willingly in a suspension of disbelief. Bad cinema, like where the writing is so bad or the acting is so bad, you just like suddenly realize, yeah, I'm in a movie theater and that's a really bad movie. You can't immerse in it. Bad writing on a novel, the constant clunk just reminds you that you're reading a book by somebody that's maybe not that great of a writer or whatever, right? And as an example, last night I was reading in bed some from this novel, and it was clunk, man. Every paragraph, there was enough clunk that I was like, it was like painful, right? Then I'm also wrapping up a reading of 1984, right, by George Orwell. I read it in 1984. I'm rereading it 37 years later. Um, And then I open up Orwell and I start reading from 1984, and I read 50 pages before I realize I've got to shut this thing down because I got to go to bed. I got to go to sleep, right? You see the difference, right? One of those, it's like the barrier to entry is just, unfortunately, the story's fine. And then here comes Orwell, where the barrier to entry, I start reading it, and it's just like whoosh. It's so well written, such great literature. Okay, so can code do that, right? And when it comes to code, for you ever done this where somebody does something goofy in code you're looking at, right? That you have to maintain or something. Or if you haven't done that, even like the assignment you get from the professor, and the assignment like doesn't actually, it's ambiguous. It just doesn't even tell you what you really need to know. Then you're like, okay, I'm ready to go, and then you're like, that's I don't know what you meant. Is it this? Is it that? What are you doing? Right? You're trying to create a mental model to do the assignment. Or you start reading somebody's code that you inherited and you're like, I don't know what in the hell this thing's even doing. You're like, I'm looking at it, and you'll look at other code, and I don't know why, right? But I'll look at other code where I'll just go, oh, okay. Yeah, like, okay, yeah, I see this, I see that. There's the files. Okay, right? And this is an honest question. What's the difference, right? Why is it that I can look at one person's code and I know what it's trying to do, by the way, right? I know what it's trying to be. And I'm just laboring through it. And then somebody else's code, it just almost like witnesses to me of its function and form. Boom. I just start reading them just like, oh yeah, boom, boom, boom. So that other thing would need to be over here. Pop it open. Yeah, yeah. No, that's right. Oh yeah. You know?
Yeah.
Why?
I
Right?
guess, yeah. My thought on it would be that it kind of is a building of ideas, and if the ideas are disordered or non-logical or not really communicable, then there's no point to any of this. Well,
That's
I
right.
mean there is, but
No,
yeah.
yeah, I understand what you meant by that. Um, it's anyway, and so I do believe that from a code perspective, that this quality without a name absolutely should be present. Remembering, as I said on whenever day one, uh, that the biggest single cost of software development of a product that persists is program comprehension. The single most expensive line item is engineer reads code she didn't write and has to understand it, build a mental model. That is the number one expense of any software project over time. Right?
Yeah.
Now, how much? Now,
Yeah, no, that is miserable.
isn't that crazy? And then how much effort
Yeah.
do we put into you know, this is actually a really great research area. It would be really fun to pop the hood again on this, maybe in the source code lab that I have at UVU. But you know what I mean? Because it relates to program comprehension, it relates to current standards, because we still see people, that you just pick up code and you're just like, this person should be taken out and flogged. Like, you could have just said right here, but you had no perception. It's the curse of knowledge. You have no perception that the next person reading doesn't know what you know. And you're saying these things, but they only make sense if you are, it's the black pearl, man. You can only find it if you already know, like, where it is or whatever. I don't remember how, you know what I mean? It's, anyway, that's really a thing. And design patterns come in, segueing back. Design patterns come in because if you say, this is a model view controller, then at least I know that, okay, where's the model, where's the view, where's the controller. I know this is a protocol stack. Okay. You know what I mean? I have some idea of how this code's going to be organized. But when it's outside of well-known patterns, you get into real goofy zone.
Okay. Yeah,
And
I think I understand a lot better now.
yeah.
That makes sense. Thank you.
But again, a
I,
brilliant question, honestly. Two big distractions, good ones, based on truly meaty, really meat-filled questions. So thank you. That's just really good
well,
stuff.
I'm glad you appreciated it.
Yeah, no, I
I
do.
do have to head now,
As
but
do
I
I.
just wanted to mention that I noticed that it seems like I've noticed a lot of connections with software programming and like almost references to like Taoism, and the idea of sort of what you were talking about is the sorry, my phone's going out,
No, it's
but
all
the
good.
idea of like going with the way of things, and just finding a quality that can't be expressed. And I don't know, I
Yeah.
just thought it was kind of interesting.
No, it's very zen, and I love. We can talk later. Also, you jump on a
Yeah,
DM even sometime, and just to chew
sure.
the fat. But I'm a really big fan of, uh, you know, I'm a fan of Zen Buddhism, secular Buddhism,
Yeah,
not as
no,
a religion per
I am
se.
too.
Yeah,
I was very into that for a long time.
yeah.
Yeah,
I
I
just
never
think
got.
there's a. What's that?
I was gonna say I never dove deep on it, but it really, I don't know, just getting but understanding some concepts of it really changes how you see the world.
No, I think that's right, and I think that when you do understand those kind of key, again, for me, secular Buddhist ideas, and then they sort of settle in and begin to take form and become a little more three-dimensional. What you see is that they don't really conflict with major religious schools of thought. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Christianity, Judaism. In other words, non-Eastern religions.
yeah,
I believe that it is sort of like supplemental, not replacement,
yeah.
because I believe that it resonates with either directly about principles, you know what I mean, that just like, oh yeah, that's over here in this system under a different name. But even when that's not the case, as an articulation of an idea, right?
Hmm.
Like people will talk about, Christian people will talk about prayer and meditation. Okay. And we more or less kind of have an idea of what we mean when we say prayer, but I think that most Christian people don't actually have much of a clue what it means when you say meditation. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so there's kind of a, I love that. I love what that does to, ultimately for me, to try to find, there's a peace that comes
Hmm.
for whatever the thing is, whatever the system is. It needs to bring me peace if it's going to have my allegiance, period. Agitation does not suggest truth to me. I mean, there are truths that are agitating.
Right.
You know, there are factual truths that are agitating, but even then, I think proper religion to me leads me to find peace, even in the middle of truth, which is by its nature agitating.
Right.
If that makes sense. So once again,
Yeah.
it all comes back to and fits into my view of design. And I think it's interesting that you would make that observation, because I do think that it really does sort of distill into everything really that I do professionally. It's all kind of there, you know.
Yeah.
So
Well, I think what a lot of sort of what you're talking about and why that sort of is because a lot of the time when we think about things, whether it's the design of everyday objects or software or anything else, we have this relationship with it like it is reality, but what we're actually having is our experience of that thing, and that's
right.
what's informing a lot of what's
That's
good
right.
design or how you
That's
believe
right.
about things and so having that recognition, I think, is something you have to experience if you're going to get anywhere with any of that.
Right on. Right on.
Yeah.
Everything,
Anyway.
including objective truth and objective reality, whatever the heck that might mean, filters through a lens of subjective perception. There is no way around that. There is, right? Like right after New Year's when I had that vertigo thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? My internal objective cognitive system, and I'm an adequately smart guy, and my cognitive system said the room is moving 40 miles an hour that way.
Yep.
Guess what? Guess what? It wasn't, you know? So we are always filtering, and you have to come to peace with. It's a way of sort of letting go of our cocksureness about whatever. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Whatever things we get. In other words, I tend to, in all things, leave that open thing to just be wrong, which we'll talk about when we get more into the orders of ignorance. So
Okay.
anyway, get out
Oh,
of here. I'm going to get out of
all right.
here, but let's talk further. This is absolutely fantastic.
Well, excellent. Thank you.
All
And
right, man.
I'll see you Monday, I believe it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.